What if I told you the man who would become America's first president was a college dropout who faced crushing defeat in his first command? His journey from farmer to founder is filled with surprising lessons on leadership and resilience. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single part of this incredible story. Today, we have something very special for you. We are beginning a brand new series on the life of one of the most legendary figures in American history, George Washington. This story is not just about history, it's a journey that will help you improve your English. You will learn new words, see how sentences are built, and discover the art of storytelling, all while learning about the life of America's first president. We promise you by the end of this series, you will not only speak better English, but you will also feel inspired by the incredible struggles and triumphs of George Washington. So find a comfortable place, listen carefully, and let's begin this fascinating journey together. Part 1. The early life of George Washington. It was a cold and quiet morning on February 22, 1732, in the British colony of Virginia. In a small farmhouse in Westmoreland County, a baby boy was born. His name was George Washington. Little did anyone in that room know that this child born into a simple farming family would one day lead a revolution and become the very first president of the United States of America. But his journey was not an easy one. His life was filled with challenges, loss, hard work, and very important lessons that shaped him into the great leader the world remembers today. George Washington was born into a large family. His father, Augustine Washington, was a hard-working man who owned farms and plantations. He was a respected man in his community, but life in the 1700s was very different from today. The family depended completely on farming, and every day was a struggle for survival. George's mother, Mary Ball Washington, was a strong and strict woman. She believed deeply in discipline and the value of hard work. George had 9 siblings, but sadly not all of them survived childhood. In those days, many children died young because of diseases and the lack of good medicine. Life was unpredictable, and from a very early age, young George had to learn about strength and resilience. When George was just 11 years old, a great tragedy struck his family. His father, Augustine, suddenly passed away. This was a devastating moment for young George. Losing a father at such a young age meant that he had to grow up much faster than other children. His world changed in an instant. His mother, Mary, now had to raise him and his siblings all by herself. She was very strict about discipline, teaching him the values of hard work, complete honesty, and taking responsibility for his actions. Because his father had died, George did not inherit much land or wealth. His older half-brothers received most of the family property, which meant that George had to find his own way in the world. This challenge, however, did not break him. It only made him stronger. It's amazing to think about how some of the most difficult moments in our lives can shape who we become. George had to learn to be independent at a very young age. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever faced a challenge that in the end made you a stronger person? Please share your story in the comments below. I think we can all learn so much from each other's experiences. Unlike many other famous leaders in history, George Washington never went to a formal school. He did not receive a high-level education like the children of other wealthy families. Instead, he was homeschooled by private tutors and learned the basics, reading, writing, and mathematics. One of the biggest influences in his young life was his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington. Lawrence was like a father figure to young George. He had served in the British military and was an educated, disciplined man. George truly admired him and learned a great deal about leadership discipline and responsibility just by watching and listening to his brother. There is a famous story about young George Washington and a cherry tree. It is said that when he was about 6 years old, he received a small axe as a gift. He was so excited to use it that he went into his family's garden and chopped down a beautiful cherry tree. When his father asked who had done it, little George did not lie. He bravely looked at his father and said, "I cannot tell a lie. I did it." His father was so impressed by his honesty that he forgave him right away. This story became a legend because it represents Washington's strong moral character and his deep belief in honesty values that stayed with him for his entire life. As George grew older, he knew he needed to find a way to make a living. Since he didn't inherit much from his father, he had to work hard to build his own future. By the age of 16, he started working as a land surveyor. This job involved measuring and mapping out land for people who wanted to buy or sell property. It was not an easy job at all. George had to travel through dangerous thick forests, cross wide rivers, and often sleep outdoors in harsh weather. But these experiences made him tough. They taught him survival skills that would later help him in war and in leadership. By the time he was 17, George had become very skilled and respected in his work. He was earning good money, and people began to notice his intelligence and his discipline. He was no longer just a young farm boy. He was becoming a man of responsibility and ambition. But just as things were starting to go well, tragedy struck his life again. In 1752, George's older brother Lawrence became very sick with tuberculosis, which was a deadly disease at that time. George took care of him, even traveling with him to warmer places, hoping that the different climate might help him get better. But sadly, Lawrence passed away. This was another heartbreaking moment for George. He had lost his father at 11. At 11, and now at 20, he had lost his beloved brother and mentor. Instead of giving up, George became even stronger. After Lawrence's death, George took on some of his responsibilities. He even inherited Mount Vernon, a beautiful estate that would one day become his lifelong home. After losing his brother, George's life began to take a new turn. He was now a young man with experience, discipline, and a strong sense of duty. People were starting to notice his leadership skills, and soon he would step into a role that would change his life and the world forever. Part 2. The Journey to Leadership. By the time George Washington turned 21, he had already experienced great loss, hardship, and heavy responsibility. But now a new challenge was waiting for him, one that would shape his future and prepare him for the great battles that were still to come. During this time, Britain and France were in a serious conflict over land in North America, especially in a place called the Ohio River Valley. Both powerful nations wanted to control this valuable region. The British government needed someone reliable and brave to deliver an important message to the French, demanding that they leave the land that Britain claimed as its own. For this dangerous mission, they chose George Washington. Washington was young, ambitious, and very eager to prove himself. In 1753, he set out on a difficult journey. He traveled through dense forests, across freezing rivers, and through dangerous Native American territory to deliver the message to the French commander. The mission was incredibly hard. He faced terrible weather illness and even an assassination attempt when a guide tried to kill him. But Washington survived. He returned not only with an answer from the French, but also with valuable information for the British. This mission clearly showed Washington's courage and his determination. And even though the French refused to leave, his actions impressed the British leaders, and he was promoted to lieutenant colonel in the British colonial army. In 1754, Washington was given command of 150 soldiers and was sent back to the Ohio River Valley with orders to drive the French out. This was his first real military command, and he was determined to prove himself as a leader. He and his men built a small fort, which they called Fort Necessity. But things quickly went wrong. The French attacked with a much larger army, and Washington's men were outnumbered and not fully prepared. After a long and difficult fight, Washington was forced to surrender. It was one of the only times in his entire life that he ever surrendered. Even though this battle was a failure, Washington learned important lessons from it. Lessons about warfare, about strategy, and about leadership. He came to understand the importance of good preparation, strict discipline, and knowing your enemy. This difficult experience would help him years later when he had to face the powerful British Army in the Revolutionary War. The British and the French were now in a full war, which became known as the French and Indian War. Even though Washington had suffered a defeat, he was still highly respected for his bravery and his leadership skills. In 1755, Washington joined the British Army again, this time in a major campaign to push the French out of North America for good. He served under General Edward Braddock, a strict British commander who believed in traditional European ways of fighting. But Washington knew that fighting in the forests of America was very different from fighting on the open battlefields of Europe. During the Battle of the Monongahela, the British were ambushed by French and Native American forces. It was a complete disaster. General Braddock was shot and killed, and the British soldiers were terrified and confused. In the middle of all the chaos, Washington remained calm. He took control of the situation and led the surviving troops to safety, saving hundreds of lives. After the battle, something incredible was discovered. Washington's coat had 4 bullet holes in it, but he was completely unharmed. Many people believed that he was protected by a higher power, and this event only added to his growing legend as a leader who was destined for greatness. After the war, Washington was promoted to colonel and became the commander of all Virginia forces. But soon he grew frustrated with the British military system. He noticed that despite his loyalty and his hard work, he was not given the same respect or promotions as officers who were born in Britain. This planted the first small seeds of resentment against British rule in his heart. By 1758, Washington retired from the military and returned to his home in Virginia. He was now 26 years old and ready for a new chapter in his life. He had fought hard, gained valuable experience, and learned the strengths and weaknesses of the British Army. But he was tired of war. He wanted a peaceful life, managing his estate, and starting a family. In 1759, Washington married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children. Martha was kind, intelligent, and a wonderful partner for George. Their marriage gave Washington financial security and allowed him to focus on growing his plantation, Mount Vernon. Washington became one of the richest men in Virginia. He expanded Mount Vernon, experimented with new farming techniques, and became involved in local politics. He was respected, successful, and for a time he was happy. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for him. During the 1760s and 1770s, the tensions between Britain and the American colonies began to rise. The British government imposed heavy taxes on the colonies without giving them any representation in Parliament. This angered many Americans, including Washington. He believed in freedom and fair treatment. He saw how British laws were hurting farmers, businessmen, and ordinary people. He began attending meetings with other colonial leaders where they started to discuss resistance against British rule. The quiet farmer was slowly being pulled back into the world of leadership on a path that would lead to revolution. As we see Washington transition from a soldier to a farmer, and now toward a revolutionary leader, the story is about to enter its most dramatic phase. If you want to follow his journey and see how he steps up to lead a nation, Make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next part of this incredible story. Part 3. The Road to Revolution. By the year 1775, the American colonies were on the very edge of war with Great Britain. The British government had been taxing the colonies, heavily imposing harsh laws and refusing to give them any voice in Parliament. The people were angry, and many were ready to fight for their freedom. In April of 1775, the first shots of the American Revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord. The colonies now realized they needed a strong leader, someone who could unite them and lead their army against the most powerful military in the world, the British Army. All eyes turned to one man, George Washington. Washington was already one of the most respected men in America. He was a war hero, a wealthy landowner, and a strong, thoughtful leader. When the Second Continental Congress met in June 1775, they unanimously chose Washington to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Even though he accepted this great responsibility, Washington knew this would be the biggest challenge of his life. The American army was weak, poorly trained, and lacked weapons and supplies. The British Army, on the other hand, was well-trained, well-funded, and had a powerful navy with massive warships. Washington had no choice but to fight smart, use clever strategy, and never ever give up. Washington's first real test as a commander came in Boston. The British had taken control of the city, and Washington needed a plan to drive them out. He trained his army tirelessly. Then, with a clever strategy, he managed to position his cannons on the hills overlooking the city, forcing the British to retreat in March of 1776. This was a huge victory for America and a great boost for morale. But soon after, things became much more difficult. In August 1776, the British launched a major attack on New York City. Washington and his army fought bravely, but they were badly outnumbered. They suffered a terrible defeat, losing thousands of soldiers. Washington had no choice but to retreat. In that dark time, many of his soldiers lost hope. Some even deserted, which means they ran away from the army. As winter came, the situation became even worse. Washington's army had very little food, no warm clothes, and no money. Many people believed the revolution was about to fail. But Washington refused to give up. On Christmas night in 1776, he launched a daring surprise attack. In the middle of a freezing storm, Washington and his men crossed the icy Delaware River to attack the enemy soldiers at Trenton, New Jersey. They achieved a complete surprise and won a crucial victory. This incredible battle boosted everyone's spirits and gave the soldiers hope once again. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge was one of the hardest times of the entire war. Washington and his army camped in the freezing cold. They had no proper shelters, they had barely any food, and many soldiers died from disease and hunger. But something incredible happened during that terrible winter. Instead of breaking down, Washington used this time to train his army. With the help of a European officer named Baron von Steuben, he turned his group of poorly trained soldiers into a strong, disciplined fighting force. By the time spring arrived, Washington's army was ready to take on the British again. For several more years, Washington continued to lead his army in battles all across America. Some battles were won, and others were lost, but he never gave up his belief in their cause. In 1781, with important help from the French army, Washington led his troops in a final decisive battle at Yorktown, Virginia. After a long fight, the British army surrendered. This marked the end of the war. America had won its independence. The story of the American Revolution is a powerful reminder that even when things seem hopeless, perseverance and strong leadership can change the world. If this part of the story and its message of fighting for freedom and never giving up has inspired you, please consider sharing this video with someone you think would appreciate it. Part 4. The First President and His Final Years. After the Revolutionary War, America had won its freedom. But there was a new big problem. There was no real government, no strong leadership, and no clear direction for the new country. The people needed someone they could all trust, someone strong-wise and respected. That person was George Washington. In 1789, Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. He didn't actually want to be president. He had already served his country for many years and dreamed of retiring to his quiet farm at Mount Vernon. But the people trusted him, and he felt it was his duty to lead the new nation. On April 30th, 1789, George Washington took the oath of office in New York City, which was the first capital of the United States. The entire country set the red chant. People cheered in the streets. Church bells rang, and newspapers called him the father of our country. Washington faced many challenges as the first president. The United States was a brand new country, and everything had to be built from scratch. There were no rules for how a president should lead, no traditions to follow, and no examples to look at. But Washington knew that every decision he made would set a precedent, an example for all future presidents. He wanted to create a government that was fair, strong, and respected by the world. One of his first acts as president was to create the first cabinet, which is a group of advisors to help him run the government. He chose brilliant people to help him like Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Together, they helped Washington build the foundation of the American government. Being president was not easy. Washington faced many difficult problems. The country was in deep debt after the war, and he had to create a financial system to make the economy stable. Britain and France were at war, and both wanted America to take their side. But Washington decided that America should stay neutral and not get involved in Europe's conflicts. He even had to deal with rebellions inside his own country. At the same time, two political parties were beginning to form, and Washington worried deeply that they would divide the nation. Despite all these challenges, Washington successfully kept the country united. He created a government that would last for centuries. After serving 2 terms, which is 8 years as president, Washington decided to step down. Many people wanted him to serve a 3rd term, but he refused. He believed that no president should stay in power for too long. This was an important decision to prevent any single person from becoming like a king. Before leaving office in 1796, he gave his famous farewell address. In this speech, he gave 3 important warnings to the American people. First, he said to stay united and not let political parties divide them. Second, he advised the country to avoid foreign wars and stay out of conflicts in Europe. And third, he told the people to always protect their democracy and never let one person have too much power. His words became a guide for future leaders, and many of his warnings are still relevant today. After leaving office, Washington finally returned to Mount Vernon, his beloved home. He planned to spend the rest of his life as a farmer, enjoying quiet days with his wife Martha. But his peaceful retirement did not last long. In December of 1799, Washington developed a severe sore throat after riding his horse in the cold rain. His condition quickly got worse. On December 14, 1799, George Washington passed away at the age of 67. The entire nation mourned his death. People cried in the streets, and church bells rang across the country. Even leaders in Europe honored him. His influence remained strong long after he was gone. He set so many traditions for future presidents, like serving only 2 terms and creating a cabinet system. Today, Washington is honored in many ways. The capital city, Washington, D.C., is named after him. His face is on the $1 bill, and the Washington Monument stands tall in his memory. But his legacy is not just about statues and holidays. It's about the values he stood for: courage, integrity, and leadership. He was not a perfect man, but he was a man who gave everything for his country. He could have been a king, but he chose democracy. He could have stayed in power, but he chose to step down. He set the foundation for a strong and stable nation. So what can we learn from George Washington? We learn about leadership with honesty. He always put the needs of his country above his own desires. We learn about perseverance. He faced many defeats, but never gave up. He teaches us that failure is not the end, but a step toward success. And we learn about humility. He showed that real power comes from serving others, not controlling them. He worked to bring people together, not divide them. George Washington was more than just the first president. He was a symbol of hope, determination, and democracy. His story reminds us that one person truly can change the course of history. And that's where our story concludes for today. This one was a real journey from a young boy on a farm to the leader of a new nation. I am so curious to hear your take on it all. What were your final thoughts? Do you have any lingering questions about why a character did what they did, or about a particular moment in his life? Please leave all your opinions, theories, and questions below. I truly love reading them and building this conversation with all of you. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Keep learning, keep growing, and always believe in the power of your own potential. We'll see you in the next story.